when a character is on top, such as he was in 3 and 4, it's very hard to conjure up true grassroots, blue-collar, proletariat emotion. Because you say, hey, it's real tough to feel sorry for a guy with a Ferrari. Sorry, that's life. And we are basically a world of underdogs. So I thought if I could get him back and show that through him symbolically that what seems invincible today can be a pauper, an invalid tomorrow, just like that, and how fortune turns so quickly, especially in this country lately. I thought this is very apropos to the mood of the country.
And our second anniversary celebration of the month of November is underway. And on this installment, we're talking about 1990's Rocky V, which turns 30 years old this month. And as always, it is my pleasure to welcome as my co-host, Mike Kunda.
My man, Craig. Listen, I want to tell you and all the listeners, one of the really cool things about my job is that I get to see these Philly landmarks that were used in all the Rocky movies. And about 2 years ago, now, Rocky V, when did Rocky V come out, Craig?
The exact date, November 16th, 1990.
I thank you very much. I knew that. I just wanted to make sure you knew that. So in 1990, there was a hole in the corner of the schoolyard fence, chain link fence in South Philadelphia on Dickinson Street. Okay. Mm-hmm. That hole in the fence that Robert goes through was there until about 2 years ago. That is how long that fence was allowed to go in disrepair. I talked to the school janitor one day, and for decades, the board of the school directors, they were such huge Rocky fans, they chose just to not fix the fence because of Rocky V. Then amazing. 2 of the members died off, and they got some people in there who had normal policy and procedure, and they fixed the fence. I thought everybody would get a kick out of that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So Rocky V, I think it was inevitable that after the blockbuster success of Rocky IV, that we would get another Rocky movie. And it took 5 years for us to get that movie. And when it came out, much like Rocky IV was sort of this over-the-top, pun intended, cartoon look at Rocky, Rocky V returned us to Rocky's roots. In addition to sort of grounding it back in reality, we had the return of John G. Avildsen. Now, Mike, as Rocky V was approaching, do you remember what your feelings were when you learned that John G. Avildsen was involved in the project?
Blissful. Mm-hmm. It was off the charts, over the top blissfulness. Now, I can tell you, it was either an Oprah or it was a Time magazine where Stallone, it could have been both, where Stallone was quoted as saying, I'd like to revisit the character every 3 or 4 years to see how he's doing. And I thought, boy, what a telling statement. After seeing Rocky V and rereading that article, as I reread many past interview articles with Sly, I thought it was interesting that we've now caught up with Rocky after the riches. He's not as healthy as maybe we'd like to see Rocky. Things are gone. And I thought, boy, what an amazing turn of events, because so many athletes or musicians or actors, this has happened. This is a real world scenario where they are at the peak of their endeavors. And then for whatever reasons, they lose it all and they have to regroup. And who better to regroup than the Italian Stallion Rocky Balboa? So to me, right away, we're starting with a win here as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And I know that Stallone has directed more Rocky movies than anybody else. But I think John G. Avildsen's contribution to the Rocky universe can't be understated enough. That first Rocky would not be the movie it was without John G. Avildsen's input and direction.
Well, Craig, there you go. Because you think Tom Brady could throw the football and catch it in the end zone 60 yards down the field at the same time? I say absolutely no. So to me, it's a full team effort. Now listen, we all know Rocky happened because of Sylvester Stallone. However, you got to have a director. You got to have a guy do the music. You got to have your co-stars. So if you're going to have a director for Rocky 5, if it's not going to be Sly, Avildsen's the guy I want.
Oh, absolutely. And in addition to the return of John G. Avildsen, we had the return of Bill Conti, which I'm sure you were very, very happy with.
You know what? I got to tell you, I really, really was happy to have the Conti music back in this. I don't know that I would have made the same lyrical choices for Rocky 5 that other people made. I might have gone a slightly different route. But I was very happy to see Mr. Bill Conti back.
Yeah, and I know that me and you talking here, we're preaching to the choir, if you will, in terms of our discussion. But I think one of the things here is me and you have both been pretty open in our sort of appreciation for Rocky 5.
Yes, sir.
And, I think a lot of people overlook it because it's not as flashy and we don't get Rocky in the traditional boxing ring. But again, and I said this on the Rocky 4 celebration, there's a Rocky movie for every mood. And there is definitely a time and a place where you want to grab Rocky 5 off the shelf and watch it. Another thing I think is interesting, Mike, is I know at the time the reception to Rocky 5 was pretty timid or cool. But in my experience in 1990, we weren't really disappointed with Rocky 5. And I actually remember watching it on home video a lot with my cousins.
You're absolutely correct. It's not until hindsight, looking back through the rearview mirror of life, have people compared it over time with Rocky 1 and Rocky 4 and have said, so I get that. I never said that. Like you, I've always been a champion of Rocky 5. But I'd like to, if I could just take a side note here.
Absolutely.
Rocky 5 was one of the few Rocky movies. I saw Rocky 1 on TV with my family, but when it was on TV in the late 70s, my father was in the recliner sleeping. So it was me and my mom really who watched it, even though my dad was right there with my brother, but he was sleeping. Rocky 5 was the first Rocky movie I saw in the theaters, really with my dad, I think, if I'm being correct. And it was quite interesting because about that time, fathers and sons have a bit of an antagonistic thing going on sometimes.
Yeah.
And same in my life, I had an antagonistic thing with my dad because I think my dad wanted me to achieve things he hadn't or that he was trying to achieve. And I think that's the job of every parent, to help their children get to the next level that they couldn't achieve. I think that's a beautiful thing. So I think Rocky 5 really comes about in a father-son relationship that a lot of people can really relate to. Did you notice that or feel that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we've tried our best to sort of decode the timeline of Rocky. And one of the most Rocky, for lack of a better word, timelines is that between Rocky 4 and Rocky 5, because it pretty much starts with him coming back from Russia, but Robert is all of a sudden a teenager.
Yeah, right.
Now, I think from a storytelling perspective, I'm not sure. Well, it's kind of interesting because there's actually a fan cut of Rocky 5. I think it's called the 80s Remix.
Okay.
Where they pretty much do like 1 year later, from Rocky getting off the plane to Rocky at the lawyer learning that he's broke. Now, in the cut of Rocky 5 that we have, we don't really have any indication of that, but the movie's always worked kind of better for me since then, where I kind of think of there being at least that year apart between the two movies. But I'm not sure how else Stallone could have done it, but I'm sure there was a reason that he aged Robert to the age that he did. And I think that's one of the more powerful aspects of Rocky V, because you have two father-son relationships that are really going on. You have the one with his own son, but then you also have the one with Tommy Morrison, and both sons are sort of striving for that attention from their father.
Yeah, I think so. Two things. I think the geek Rocky side of us, the fanboy in us, will be questioning Sly's intention on the maturing of Robert rather quickly. Knowing Sly, having the conversations that I've had with him, and I could be totally wrong, and I would love to be proven wrong. I would gladly bow my head to this. But I think if you were to ask Sly, what's the deal with the kid being like, all these years older? Don't think too hard, okay? Just enjoy the movie. You know what I mean? I don't think Sly put any thought into his son being too older or whatever. I think here's what it is. If you believe the Millennium Falcon can fly, if you believe the laser saber fight with Darth Vader and Superman can fly, you're going to believe this kid is a few years older and shut up about it. That's what I think Sly would tell me if I asked him that question, but I would love to be proven wrong happily.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing is it's kind of the way that we watch movies now. Back when we were watching Rocky V, it had been 5 years since Rocky IV, where I think the home video market has sort of changed things a bit in terms of how people will marathon these movies now. And when you marathon them, you sort of see those inconsistencies in the character of Robert. So I think it's kind of interesting how audiences consume movies has changed so much in that 30-year period.
So you said 85, Rocky IV comes out. 90, Rocky V comes out. So you've got a 5-year span. You're in the movie theater, and your 5 years have gone on since Rocky IV. So sure, in that moment, Robert is going to be 14 or 15. Of course he is.
Yeah, I mean, there's people that hadn't seen Rocky IV since they saw it in theater and maybe on TV one time in 1987.
Now,
let's talk a little bit about the characters here. Rocky sort of returns to a little bit more of being that, not even physically, but from a presentation standpoint, Stallone's portrayal of Rocky is a little bit more in line with, the Rocky that we sort of knew before Rocky IV and have kind of seen since. Do you want to talk a little bit about, Stallone sort of reclaiming the Rocky character for Rocky V?
So one of the things that I think has been a disservice to Rocky fans, if you've ever read the novelization of Rocky III, before the night that Paulie gets arrested for beating up a pinball machine, Rocky, great scene. Rocky is in his home study. Adrian's in bed. Rocky's in his home study surrounded by leather-bound books, and he's speaking into a tape recorder. And he has a dictionary in front of him, and he's learning new words, multi-syllable words, lots of vowels. He's trying to educate himself. Now, we don't see that in the movies, but I wish we did, because we see that Rocky has kind of grown in his vocabulary, his education, whatever. Now, all of a sudden, brain damage is supposed to make him dumb again. It might make him slow, it might make him forgetful, but I don't know that brain damage makes him necessarily not as bright or whatever. Anyways, I feel that if that scene from Rocky III had been put in, and I feel if there was a tweaking, maybe not quite as broken. I think if it was a little less broken, Sly's portrayal of Rocky, I think more fans would have had a positive reaction to it. But again, who am I to say? He's the actor. This was his choice in portraying Rocky's, I guess, damaged state of mind. And I mean, it worked for me. I didn't have a problem with it, but these are things that I hear from other people. So what was the question?
No, I think you handled it fine. And, again, we get the Adrian performance we expect from Talia Shire, and we get the always great Burt Young as Paulie. So some of the new faces we see are Sly's son, Sage Stallone, playing Robert. Now, it's hard to talk about Sage without thinking about where Sage is in 2020 and no longer being with us. But do you think that Sage playing his son in this movie added a level of authenticity to the movie?
I think the family drama, yes. I think the family drama was raised here on set in a good way. I really do. I think Sly and his son, and this is pure conjecture on my part, I think Sly and his son worked to a level where they were comfortable portraying this Balboa family drama that I no doubt believe happened in the Stallone household. Mm-hmm. So, and the other thing I want to say, and this is, I really mean this, I thought Sage was fine as Robert. I don't think he was bad at all. I think George Washington Duke and Tommy Gunn, Morrison, I think they were the two horrific acting parts. And I get some people how they say the way they saw Sly partake as Rocky, but really George Washington Duke is the Don King of this movie, and I think Tommy Gunn is he was just a horrible actor, good boxer.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. And I think you pointed out something that Sage's performance is sort of not looked upon fairly, because I think there's some anger that shows through in those scenes.
Yeah.
That I think Sage was really able to tap into something emotionally. And, he wasn't primarily an actor. He didn't grow up to be an actor. He did a lot more behind the scenes work. And he's got a really interesting history. He got involved with a company called Grindhouse, which restored and re-released basically, B movies.
Yeah.
And he did some important work. He was involved in sort of, I think, bringing Cannibal Holocaust back to home video. I mean, we could probably spend an hour talking about Sage. I did bump into Sage once at a convention, and I'm sure I talked about this on SlyCast, where I stood next to him while he bought a Reese's Peanut Butter Big Cup.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned George Washington Duke, and I think on paper, that was what he was given to work with, because we all know Richard Gant is a capable actor.
Yeah.
But you can only do so much with what you're given on paper. And I think he delivered exactly what he was supposed to, and exactly what Sly and John G. Avildsen wanted. Now, Tommy Gunn is a really, really interesting. And unfortunately, again, Tommy Morrison is no longer with us, and his life sort of took a sad turn. But we're here to celebrate. And I think the problem a lot of people have with Rocky V is that Tommy Gunn wasn't Rocky. And now in retrospect, you might say that maybe the casting could have been done, but I actually think the fact that we didn't have another kid from the streets of Philadelphia as Rocky's protege is a benefit. Instead, we get, this blonde, sort of beefy Tommy Gunn from Oklahoma. Do you want to sort of expand on that a little bit in terms of, the fact that we didn't get sort of a Rocky clone?
I'm really glad they didn't do that. Because there's only one Rocky, and I think that's why Creed works so well, because it's not a Rocky clone. Mm-hmm. It's a complete opposite creature, really, than what the Italian Stallion was. And same too goes for Tommy Gunn. I think it was great that they brought him in from Oklahoma, outside of Philadelphia, that this young blonde-headed boy came to find Rocky in Philly. It was almost a journey. You could almost imagine Tommy Gunn's journey fighting across the states to get to Philadelphia. He's fighting in clubs to get a couple of dollars to get a Greyhound from one town to another to get to Philly to meet Rocky to become champion. I think there's almost a movie there in and of itself. I don't think Tommy Morrison was horrific. I think the problem was a cacophony of issues. I think it was Rocky fighting in the streets. I think it was the cartoon imagery that maybe of Richard Gant, the way that Duke was portrayed. I think there was just a bunch of small little things that kept piling up why so many fans have issues. But again, I think if we look at why Sly chose Tommy Morrison, because it's easier to teach someone to act than it is to teach an actor to box.
Yeah, and I think if you want to sort of find a contrast to the original Rocky, the original Apollo Creed was Ken Norton.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine anybody but Carl Weathers playing Apollo. Thankfully, Carl Weathers was a very athletic individual and looked like a natural boxer.
Yeah.
But I think here we got the flip side. So in this movie, they went with a real actor, and you traded sort of that acting ability for the authenticity of Tommy Morrison, the boxer.
Yeah, right. And again, I'm just not that hard up on condemning the things in Rocky V. I just appreciate this movie. I thought Tommy Morrison did the best he could with what he was equipped with. I thought he moved athletically. He moved incredibly well. I mean, there's that shot that they play in the montage where Tommy's climbing the ranks, where he punches that guy 3 times in a row and he knocks him back. The sweat goes flying. And they're playing the rap music. I just thought it was great. I thought cinematically, Tommy Morrison worked beautifully. I really believe that.
Yeah. And another special thing we get in Rocky V, and I know that this has bothered you for a very, very long time, we get an appearance from Burgess Meredith as Mickey in a flashback. And I know you've often questioned when exactly this scene takes place, but I think it's another special aspect of Rocky V that a lot of people forget is, we get a brand new Mickey scene.
A brand new Mickey scene handing off the boxing glove to Rocky that we saw, Rocky wearing it in Rocky 3. So I think it was a beautiful scene, but it is one of the questions I want to ask Sly. When does it take place? And again, knowing Sly in the little bit of the way that I do know the guy, he would say, forget about how cut Rocky is, okay? Forget about it. It's Rocky 2. It's right before Rocky 2, okay? And that's what I think Sly would say. But I was very glad. And you know what? I do want to take just a little short side cut here. I have Burgess Meredith's granddaughter taking the tour in a little while, and I'm so excited.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Her name is Annie. She is a wonderful young woman.
Yeah.
And she has so many backstories. And I've spoken with her on the phone, and I Instagram her. And I just think she is the sweetest thing. And she's got all these great stories. So I hope to have more stories about Burgess and Rocky.
Oh, that's great. That's really exciting. I look forward to hearing about that tour.
I enjoyed that scene. I thought, Mickey giving Rocky those words of wisdom and trying to bring him around and build him up. And I think it was all very well done. No complaints.
Yeah. We've spent a lot of time talking about Rocky V on the SlyCast, and we devoted a whole episode to the work print, which at one point it was online. I don't think it is anymore. But that was, I think, John G. Ableton's original sort of assembled cut of Rocky V before, I guess, the studio gave their notes. And, there's some substantial differences, and you can go back and listen to our Rocky V work print episode. Now, we're getting a Rocky IV, new cut from Sly. Do you think it's unfortunate that we'll probably never see a proper release of John G. Ableton's vision for Rocky V?
I'll tell you what, I don't know that we're not going to. I'm going to predict this right now.
Okay.
I'm going to predict that if the Rocky IV director's cut does fairly well, it doesn't have to do great. We're talking, 35 years, right?
Yeah.
So if it does fairly okay, I believe we absolutely will see a Rocky V cut, because I know for a certified fact Sly wants to fix Rocky V. So even though he was not the director, he's the next closest thing. So today, no, let me rephrase that. Today's Sylvester Stallone, I would have a great deal of confidence correcting Rocky V. I really would.
Do you think that the work print would still be a good place to work from?
Well, it will be interesting because I put up 5 or 6 2-minute segments of the work print because, I have a copy of the work print, as do several serious Rocky fans. And so I put it up, and Sly messaged, and he said, "Oh my God, I've not seen any of these scenes since 1990. How do you have this? How can I get a hold of it?" So I say to myself, holy Christ, if Sly doesn't have these scenes, if he can't get a hold of it, maybe the only scenes I have that have been were the work print scenes. And you know as well as I do, as well as the fans listening, it's a very grainy work print.
It's got the time code on it.
Yep. Can't make a movie out of it. Now, I assume in MGM's vaults they have all the unused footage. So that is something that Sly could go to and say, hey, I want to do this. But here's my worry. Here's my huge concern. We've all seen the messages about Expendables 4 and Sly's working on Hunter and a whole bunch of projects that he's working on, Samaritan and so on. Sly only has so many bullets left in the gun.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to be 75 years old. I mean, he's got to get on this. You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing, Mike. Well, first I want to ask you, did Sly get those scenes? Did they make it?
So here's the thing that frustrates me. He asks me literally, how can I get these scenes? And I said, I messaged him. I said, Sly, just, send me where you'd like to send them, and I will make a copy of the disc and send it to you. Yeah. Haven't heard from him. Okay, that was like 2 weeks ago. I'm like, come on, man. You're killing me.
I do have to say that I think if you look at Rocky V as a restoration,
right,
as opposed to a new cut, if you will, they sort of, have taken, unfinished, let's say Orson Welles movies and restored them based on notes that were left behind. I think I don't think, people might appreciate me comparing Orson Welles to the Rocky franchise, but I think there's value there. And I think if you handle Rocky V like a restoration where you take John G. Avildsen's work print, you take whatever notes exist from 1990, and you try and compile that version of the movie. Now, it probably wouldn't satisfy Sly, but if you gave it to a restoration expert, somebody who does this for a living, I think you could get an accurate alternate Rocky V from 1990. Now, I don't know if that would satisfy everybody, but I think it would definitely be something I would be very interested in, because I think, in terms of all the things that we haven't gotten from the Rocky series, and knowing and having watched it, that Rocky V work print really shows another version of the movie that we could have got.
Well, I'm going to go on the record right now, and I'm going to tell you this right here and now. I think you go after Derek Wayne Johnson.
No.
Derek Wayne Johnson, he did King of the Underdogs, right?
Yeah.
So I think Derek spent an enormous amount of time with Avildsen. And I think Derek's maybe Sly sits down with Derek, who I know they know each other quite well.
Yeah.
And I think they have a conversation about this. I think Derek is one of the go-to founders of the Rocky V restoration movement. That's a good start.
Well, how do we make that happen?
Well, let me call Derek right now, and I'll tell him to call Sly.
And again, for anybody who's interested, there is, and I'll include a link in the show notes here, but we devoted a whole episode to the Rocky V work print, where we sort of discussed the differences between that and the theatrical cut. So if you haven't listened to it, or if you haven't watched the work print yet, you can listen to that episode. And like I said, I do know at the time we recorded the work print episode, it was easy to find online, not so much anymore, but I think it's a worthwhile episode. And It's funny. Again, I don't want to try and have to convert people to liking Rocky 5, but
Yeah.
if somebody needs that push over the edge, I think the work print, will go a long way in sort of helping them along. And I think one of the funny things is, if some of the scenes from the work print had made it into reality, we wouldn't have gotten Rocky Balboa that we knew, because he reveals little Marie's, true fate in the Rocky 5 work print.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also one of the things Sly told me he was very unhappy about. He said it was an ill-conceived moment and planned poorly. So that would be something that definitely will not make it back into the movie. It could have worked, but really it was just a way to shoehorn in Little Marie saying, "Screw you, creepo," at the end of the said scene.
Yeah, it was fan service.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So again, you don't need anybody to convince me and you, Mike, about what a solid entry in the series Rocky 5 is. But is there any final sort of thought you have on Rocky 5 as it turns 30?
I would simply don't get too crazy. Don't get too over opinionated about it. Just sit down and watch it. That's it. Watch it with the favorite person you have in your life. Have some popcorn and just sit back and just be grateful you got another Rocky movie. It's not that bad. People are complaining about it. They're selling their children. There's dogs and cats living together. It's crazy, people, what's happening out there. Just watch it and have fun. Just love Rocky 5. Be glad you got another entry that Sly cared enough to do another Rocky movie. That's my take on it.
No, and I think that's a perfect take, Mike. And again, I always love sitting down with you for this show to talk. And anytime we can talk the Rocky movies, I kind of know that's your wheelhouse, if you will. Yeah. Last time we sat down prior to these anniversary episodes was for Assassins, which wasn't as fun of a discussion. And I do know we have coming up the next movie we're covering on SlyCast is Daylight, which has sort of seen a little bit of a resurgence. It's now like a really popular movie on Netflix.
How about that? Daylight. I got some great stories about New York City when Daylight came out, being around the tunnels and stuff, and some things that had happened in New York. So I'm looking forward to discussing that.
Yeah, we're going to have to wrangle one or both of the Jeffs for that. And
we got to get those bums back on. If you bums are listening, you guys got to chime in. Come on. It is not the same without the both of you guys. Come on.
Yeah. So again, Mike, thank you so much for helping contribute to this celebration of Rocky 5. And we'll talk next time.
Thanks, Craig. Take care, buddy.
Hi, my name's Patrick. I'm from Germany, and I just want to tell you the story of my first Rocky at the cinemas, which was Rocky 5 back in 1990. And I remember it was 2 days before Christmas. And of course, I really wanted to see this movie. Now, the problem was that the next cinema was not in my hometown, but in the next bigger city, which was about 20 minutes away from us. So we either had to take the bus or ask the parents to drive you there. So now the weather was very bad. It was, as I said, 2 days before Christmas, so my parents didn't really want me to drive, and were very reluctant to drive me to the next bus stop. But finally, after I begged them to do so, they did. So I was sitting at the cinema and watching that movie, and of course, in 1990 there was no internet, so the only news I got about this movie was from some movie magazine articles, and in all these articles they said that Rocky might die in that film. So during the final fight, the street fight, I was really biting my nails. I was hoping and praying that Rocky wouldn't die, and I was so nervous. So when the movie was over and Rocky, of course, hadn't died, I was so happy. And to this day, the Rocky 5 experience is one of my best movie experiences ever at the cinema. And because of that, Rocky 5 will always have a special place in my heart. And I really love that movie.
If you want it, you can do it. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't. You don't have to hurt them. Just go for it.
Okay, and this celebration of Rocky V as it turns 30 continues. And as promised and discussed on our Rocky IV 35th anniversary discussion, it's my pleasure to bring back on the show fellow host of the monthly Sylvester Stallone Fan Podcast Network joint show. It is Ryan from the Going the Distance podcast. Ryan, welcome.
Hey, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I always love being a part of the SlyCast discussion, so thank you, Craig.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You're one of my favorite guests and one of my favorite co-hosts.
Oh, wow. Don't tell Doug.
Well, hopefully when I talk to Doug, I'll be able to say the same thing.
Yeah, you just say the same thing. You just say, don't tell Ryan.
So at the end of our Rocky IV discussion, you sort of alluded to the fact that you were looking forward to talking about Rocky V because in a weird way, you feel that the plot of Rocky V was inevitable. Do you want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, and we all know the hatred that Rocky V seems to instill in a lot of people. And I think a true Rocky fan, and I'm not calling out non-Rocky fans here, that's not my intent, but a true Rocky fan will see there's a lot to love in Rocky V. And just to throw it under the proverbial bus because it has some really awkward or not great moments and lack of direction or behind-the-scenes chaos that translated onto the film, there's a lot of heart and there's a lot to love in that film. So regarding that comment, who do you get bigger than Drago? You know, what are we doing here? Do we get somebody who's 10 feet tall? Do we go to space? Mm-hmm. So Stallone recognized this and he did the right thing. The natural progression is Rocky has to retire. And the thing that he can't beat is brain damage or a medical condition. He can't beat that. And he's got to retain his family now. And the struggle is for, now the fight is for his family unity. They lose all their money. It's a great setup. In fact, the whole I've said it 1,000 times. I know even many fans are divided on the street fight or not. I will say it. I'll say it 100 times. The film would have got an extra 2 or 3 points on IMDb, even if they did the street fight, but cut it down for like 2 minutes of the street fight. Cops come, break it up, and Adrian says, "You know what? Let's fight him in the ring after all." And if they ended in the ring, another 10-minute segment with a quick 2-round knockout. Mm-hmm. I would be curious how many fans would leave the theater going, gee, I sure wish it just ended in the street.
Yeah.
Why did they have to resolve it finally in the ring?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
What are your thoughts on the film?
The thing about it for me is, and I said this with Mike, I've probably said it on air a bunch of times. One of the great things about the Rocky series is there's a film for whatever mood you're in.
Right.
And Rocky V fits into that equation. And if you think about it, Rocky V was pretty gutsy in retrospect. I know my feelings have changed on Rocky V, mainly after starting this podcast. And with the exception of Jeff Ferry, who was pretty vocal about this being the worst Rocky film, I've defended this film a lot. And I think there's a lot in this film that people can really, really enjoy. And I think it gets overlooked, mainly because, like you said, Rocky doesn't get in the ring. And that's a really hard pill for a lot of people to swallow.
I think what's made it easier to swallow, quite frankly, is one, we get Rocky Balboa, part 6. Yeah. We get him back in the ring. Mm-hmm. And so watching Rocky V now as part of a story arc, and that the movie franchise and the Rocky life on film does not end with him not being in the ring one last time.
Yeah.
Stallone, knowing this, corrects that. And we know that what he's doing. He corrected that arc when he waves to the crowd in part 6 and says, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the fans and all that stuff. That's what fans wanted. We wanted to kind of be recognized and say, hey, Sly, we paid for this journey. We made this journey, successful with our, wallets. And it was Sly's way of saying, thank you, fans. Thank you. It means a lot. Trust me, I feel the love. And so we left that satisfied. He lost, of course, the fight. It didn't matter. He went the distance. He ended the way he came in. So that's the bow that 5 didn't have. So in a weird, ironic way, had 5 ended properly, we may never have had 6.
Yeah. That's a great point as well. And not to get down a whole nother road, but I think in terms of tying bows and stuff, Creed 2 is the reason that I never want to see Rocky on screen again, because
I know.
The ending that Rocky gets at the end of Creed 2 is the perfect way to leave that character, because he's in the exact place he needs to be.
Yeah, I know. He hugs his son. He's
meets his grandson.
With his grandson, Logan. Uh-huh. I mean, the kid does look like Talia Shire. It's crazy.
Yeah. So now, in terms of being exactly where they're supposed to be, Rocky V also brought back, who we hadn't seen since Rocky I, director John G. Avildsen. How important do you think he was to Rocky V?
My understanding was, and I think this was from Derek, and I don't think I'm betraying any behind the scenes stuff, but he basically said that the cast, not John, but they weren't hungry, and they were all stars. It's like think of your favorite musical band, and once they're not hungry anymore, they produce an album where it's like, what are you doing? Like, this album's garbage. Like, well, you want an album, I gave you a free album. And I think this was like, so this is Sly and Talia and Bird. They're all guilty of this a little bit, but probably Sly, quite frankly, the most. If you have to blame anyone, you might have to blame him. I wonder how much of even though his star was fading a little bit by 1990, I wonder how much of his stardom maybe interfered with the creative hunger that this movie could have been.
So do you think John G. Avildsen's participation was less getting sort of nostalgia going for the first Rocky movie and more?
Oh, yeah. Well, think about it. When John directed the first one, Sly was nobody.
Yeah.
And so even though Sly had a lot, we've seen the footage with him in the ring and doing the box sequences. Like, he was always a creative force. But I suspect with part one, he probably listened to John. In part 5, do you think he took any direction from John? Like, really?
No, not performance-wise. No,
that's what I mean. Yeah.
Do you think that there's, a markedly different version of Rocky V if it was directed by Sly?
Yeah, and that would be the interesting thing. We know there's a director's cut, or sort of an unofficial
work
print cut, and we know it's much different. And I've watched it. I'm actually halfway through it right now. I've never seen it until you sent it to me, and I am surprised by the changes. I didn't know. So seeing the Rocky V work print, seeing how much footage wasn't used, and how it makes the story feel different. Going back to Rocky IV a little bit, I guess films have a lot of footage that we don't see.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not surprised now that Stallone has a lot of footage to put into Rocky IV to make it a director's cut. Now seeing the work print for Rocky V. So, yeah, we do have physical proof that John's vision was marred by Sly in the editing room. I think Sly was the boss in that film. And I'm not saying that Sly was wrong, but I wonder what the film would have looked like had Sly said, John, this is your vision, man. I just want you to do the Rocky V John G vision. Let's just do it. I've already had 3 films under my belt, and they were great box office success. Let's see what you've got. Take us back. Take us back.
Yeah.
And it would have been interesting if that work print had a final, fresh cut. I wonder what it would have done.
Yeah, and you know what? It's real interesting because in the vaults, there's probably enough material to properly assemble that, but who knows?
But I don't think Sly would do it, though. See, that's the problem, because it's not his vision. I don't know if he could bite the eagle bolt and say, well, this is John's vision. I'm going to try to recreate his vision.
Yeah. I'd almost say you approach it as a restoration. I don't know. Unfortunately, neither one of us have the ability to pull that off. In terms of the other folks that sort of surround him in this film, we got 2 new faces.
Right, yes. Yeah.
Robert is yet another actor, and we can talk for days probably about the differences in age, but we get Sage Stallone in here. Mm. And for me, I think Sage really, really brought a lot to that character. Do you want to talk at all about the relationship between Rocky and his son and Sage's performance?
I saw this film when I was 15 in the theaters, and I've spoken about that on my show, so I won't go too much deeply. But I remember watching Sage at that age, and he was about a couple years younger than me. I think he was my age in real life. Mm-hmm. And so watching him on screen, I remember feeling irritated by him, the same way I felt about Will Wheaton on Star Trek The Next Generation. Crusher. What's his name?
Wesley Crusher, yeah.
But I think it was unfair. And I think I don't know why we're so hard on child actors. I don't know why we do that. Watching it now as an older gentleman and reviewing it again for season 5 of our show, he actually does a great job. I've seen a lot of child acting since this film, and for a first time big time role and to be with his dad in such a huge franchise, he does just fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know what I was thinking. And that goes the same for Tommy Gunn. I would quickly say the same thing. I was really hard on Tommy's acting. There's a couple of weak moments here and there, but for a first time off the street acting, and he's a boxer, he's not trained in acting. He was a better actor than Dolph. He's a better actor than Mr. T. I'm sorry.
We'll get back to Sage in a minute, but the Tommy Morrison thing is exactly what I said with Mike, and you just illustrated that. He was a boxer, and you had two roads you could go down. You could either have a boxer come in that had a act, or an actor that had a box. And for Rocky V, you needed somebody, as, in my opinion, they made the right decision bringing in a boxer, because you just needed that physicality. I don't know if you could have found a Carl Weathers in 1990 like they did with him in the first Rocky.
Yeah, because he already had the big build and he had the boxing skills. So you've eliminated two issues right there. We don't have to train this guy. Mm-hmm. He knows how to box. Let's just see if he can act a little bit.
Yeah. So getting back to Sage, do you think any of that performance was, I'm not going to say method acting, but do you think any of that performance was sort of influenced by the relationship that Sage had with his dad in real life?
Well, Sly wrote it.
Yeah.
you got to wonder, but Sly is such an interesting character. I mean, he's just a person. He happens to be a mega celebrity, but he's just a guy. And Sage is part of his first marriage to Sasha. And he is so oddly dismissive about his first family with Sasha's ex-wife, Sergey, who's has his handicap issues. He never talks about him, who still survives. Sage, of course, passed away. And it's tragic. It's it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But even before, he had the girls while Sage was alive. And is there any photos of Sage with the sisters? If somebody on the internet could show me a picture of Sage with his half sisters, these three girls are his blood, half blood. I'm a blended family. So I have two sons from my first marriage. I remarried and I had kids with my current wife. And my children are all friends and they all love each other. And there's no secret. My younger kids know that their two older brothers have a different mom. And there's pictures of them together. Why is there no relation between Sly's son Sage and Sly's daughters?
Yeah. Yeah, it's ultimately tragic, the end that Sage had. So you're of the opinion that performance was definitely informed by probably feelings he had in real life.
I would say so. I think maybe Sage and Sly had discussions at home, and Sly's like, "Hey, you want to hammer these things out on screen? You want to yell at me on TV?" So, I think their relationship must have been strained.
Yeah. It's sad. It's sad what happened with Sage.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I disliked about the character in the movie was that stupid earring.
I know.
When I was in my 20s, I had the hoop, the little tiny hoop.
Oh, wow.
But anytime a guy has the dangly earring, it just bugs me. Even Lawrence Taylor, when he used to wear that, just looks goofy.
In 1990, it looked bad. Okay, it wasn't even a style 1990. So to say it's aged poorly in 30 years is an understatement. It has never aged properly. It's always looked bad. Yeah, that's funny. That earring was a bad choice. I don't know why he did that with the cufflink. They should have made it just a necklace. At the end of the day, they should have just made it a necklace.
Yeah, I guess it was part of his rebellion, right?
I guess. Imagine if you put it through his nose.
Yeah. So I've devoted probably more time to talking about Rocky V than anybody else at podcasts. Well, I don't know. I mean, you did a whole season on Rocky V.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I don't want to. Well, yeah, we did cover a whole season of Rocky V, and we had some great interviews in season 5. Bill Conti was one of them on season 5, and we also interviewed Richard Gant, who played George Washington Duke. And what an incredible interview. So right under Bill Conti, Richard Gant was an amazing interview, very generous with his time and stories. And I will say, for the record again, I'll say it 100 times, frickin' Kevin Connolly ghosted me. We had him on the horn.
I know.
I could show you. I still have the email chains where we're like, yeah, let's make this happen. Let's set up a time. I set up 5 different dates. Hey, Mr. Connolly, which one works for you? Ghosted.
Yeah. And you know what? Ghosted. That's his loss, Ryan, because that would have been the definitive Kevin Connolly interview out there. So that's his loss. Yeah. It's our loss ultimately.
I know.
So between the two of us collectively, there is a lot of Rocky V love.
Yes.
That we've contributed to the podcast ether. And I'm glad to be on the same side of the fence as you, because I think Rocky V needs to be celebrated more than it is.
I agree.
And I'm glad that there are people that are, I'm not going to say changing their mind on it, but are at least starting to appreciate it a little bit more.
Put this way, I think more people have changed their mind regarding Rocky V than haven't. I think people are softening on it, and I think people are just recognizing we're not getting movies like this anymore, and maybe just appreciate the good parts that it had. Yeah, it has some flaws, absolutely, but so do all the films except for part one. I can give you flaws in every other film.
Yeah, good point. And I also think your point about Rocky Balboa helping Rocky V, 16 years later or however many years it was. So
crazy.
So Ryan, that's Rocky V at 30. I love these anniversary episodes. I have to look on the calendar and see what the next anniversary episode is, because there's some of my favorite SlyCast ones to do because I have to do absolutely zero prep for them. And I don't do a lot of prep to begin with.
2026, maybe 2026 will be the 20th anniversary of Rocky Balboa.
Oh, wow.
It's only 5 years from now, man. That doesn't take long. Oh, boy.
So, any final thoughts you want to share about Rocky V or just anything in general?
Well, let's cross our fingers we get that work print, and let me finish with proper finish. Obviously, it is a rough cut, but I will. If anyone wants a copy of the Rocky V work print, email me at gtdwithrr@gmail.com, and I'll set up a Google Drive, and we'll make it happen. Let's spread the love.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Ryan, this was great. Again, Ryan is part of the Sylvester Stallone Fan Podcast Network, along with myself and Doug from the Rocky Minute. All of Ryan's Rocky content is part of that feed. It's a majority of the feed. So if you enjoy what you've heard on the SlyCast here and you haven't listened to Ryan's show for some strange reason,
there's people that listen to SlyCast that don't listen to me.
Vice versa, too.
It's weird. I don't know. That's okay. That's okay. You don't have to. We always said we appreciate anyone that does, but we I don't know. I do find it odd. But I will say that our crossover episodes with me, you, and Doug seem to be the most downloaded and the most fun reviewed. So that's good. We'll keep those going. Yeah,
there's actually a guy, I think he's across the pond, who's been sort of catching up with us on Twitter. I think as he's been listening, I think his name is Nick.
Yeah.
And he recently tweeted about our first collaboration, which was the SlyCast Specialist Super Crossover.
Right.
So it's good to see that people are still going in the archives and enjoying that stuff. And I always get a kick out of it when I see Nick tweet along to an episode that has been out a long time.
Yeah. They're evergreen. At the end of the day, they're evergreen. We just talk about the films, no matter what's happening in politics around the world or even COVID. We just talk about the movies. So there's no real time limit on the episodes we've done.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And again, thank you to past and future and current listeners, because it's your feedback that really sort of makes doing all this as enjoyable as it is, beyond getting down and chatting with, folks like you and Doug and Mike Kunda and Jeff Ferry and Jeff Hewlett and all that. So it is nice when people appreciate the work you're putting in. So Ryan, until next time, this was Rocky V on its 30th.
All right. Thank you. Take care, brother.
And here we are talking Rocky V on its 30th anniversary. And it's my pleasure to bring back to the show a friend of the show, sometime guest of the show, and one of the hosts of the monthly Sylvester Stallone Fan Podcast Network, Doug Greenberg from Rocky Minute. Doug, welcome.
Thanks, Craig. I can't believe it's been 30 years since Rocky V, man.
I know, right? And the amazing thing about Rocky V is, like, we're both old enough to remember when Rocky V was the last Rocky movie for a long time. It was 16 years?
Yeah.
Between that and Balboa. And, we went all through the 90s having no idea that Stallone would ever revisit the character. Now, I know Rocky V is probably the most polarizing entry in the series. Do you want to go back to before Rocky V sort of gained the reputation it had, and sort of, maybe put your head where it was leading up to its release and when you first saw it?
Yeah. This was one, I saw in the theaters as in 1990. I was 12 years old, and I couldn't put my finger on what was missing. You know what I mean? Like, if you think about it, the bones of the story are good. Okay, Rocky retired from boxing. You could kind of skip the whole brain damage angle. That's whatever. retire from boxing, takes on a hungry young fighter that reminds himself of himself, and has a son who's fighting for his father's attention that gets kind of pushed to the wayside because Rocky's invested in this new project. I think the bones of the story are great, but I probably have only seen this movie a handful of times. So until we cover it minute by minute, maybe we'll get a better idea on how it could have been improved upon. But I mean, starting with, I don't know if you want to do this. We're celebrating. We're celebrating it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I think you hit on something that's kind of interesting in the fact that, Sly almost sort of wrote himself into a corner in the sense that he made Rocky V take place directly after Rocky IV. So instantly, Rocky hasn't aged the 5 years that Stallone had aged. And I guess Sly was trying to find a logical way for Rocky not to be a boxer anymore. And I guess the easiest way to do that is to just play the brain damage angle. Like you said, the bones are there and they're good in the sense that he needed to reset and reground Rocky. And I really do think that that's one of the core elements that makes Rocky V worthwhile, because it's sort of a spiritual brother to the first movie. And one thing you said that I think is probably the most important aspect of that movie is the father-son relationship. And you have the dueling father-son relationship. You have Rocky's relationship with his own son, but then also the relationship with Tommy Gunn, and, the sort of push and pull between both of those sons to get the attention of their father.
Yeah, that's what I think was the real story to tell. I think the most poignant scene to that was when he did finally overcome the whole bully thing in school, and he was so excited to go home and tell Rocky about it. And Rocky's like, "Oh no, that's great, kid." And then that was it. Kind of blew him off for Tommy Gunn. And I think if you really would have leaned into that aspect of it, you would have added a whole lot of drama to a film that, that, like you said, the push and pull between the Rocky's, seemingly being Tommy Gunn's kind of father figure, as well as his own son. The drama there, it's there. The drama is there. They should have expanded upon that, I think.
Yeah. Now, do you want to talk a little bit about Tommy Gunn, the character, and then also Tommy Morrison, the actor? And I know I talked with Ryan about this and the fact that you had two roads you could go down, right? You could either get an actor that you teach to box or a boxer that you teach to act. And I think they made the right choice in going with a boxer that you would just have to sort of teach how to act. And I think out of everything in this movie, I think Tommy Gunn gets the most unnecessary criticism. Do you have any feelings about Tommy Gunn and Tommy Morrison?
The character is the kind of hero turned villain that you would want in a film like that. He started off with good intentions, and then he gets seduced by the dark side, so to speak. And then his heel turn is what it is. So I thought the character's great. We saw in Rocky 1 and 2 and Rocky 3, we saw an actor turned fighter, right? You taught an actor how to box, and with Carl Weathers and Mr. T. And I thought that formula worked for those movies, because Apollo Creed, wasn't just a boxer in that movie. He needed to be an actor. In this, Tommy Gunn was meant to be just a fighter, a good guy turned villain. And, I think for this, taking a fighter and teaching him how to act wasn't a bad decision. I don't mind Tommy Morrison in this role. I hate to blame Avildsen too, because Avildsen's, he gave us Rocky 1, but I think some directing choices might have been lacking. I think he could have gotten more out of Tommy Morrison, is what I'm saying.
Well, the other interesting about it, and I think I probably hit on it with Mike and Ryan as well, is, this was John G. Avildsen coming back to the family, if you will. But what kind of relationship was there, and how different was it behind the camera from Rocky 1 to Rocky 5, where, over the course of the series, Stallone sort of asserts himself more and more. So you almost wonder how much Avildsen is there. And I know that we have the work print that we can sort of get an idea of where he was going. And hopefully one day, maybe we'll see that get the care and attention it deserves, especially if the Rocky IV director's cut does well. But I wouldn't dispute you there. I mean, I think one of Avildsen's strength was characters. I mean, if you look at Rocky, if you look at the Karate Kid, he's good at making those characters that are just really sympathetic and believable and authentic. So yeah, it would have been interesting to see if he had been able to spend a little bit more time coaxing a performance out of Morrison. And I know we're not talking about Rocky 1 or 2 or 3 here, but I think Carl Weathers is like a whole nother level. I mean, what he achieved, I don't think you could have gotten from anybody else. And it's amazing. And I know we all sing Carl Weathers' praise on our respective shows, but I think he was a complete anomaly.
Yeah, like an athletic guy that could act.
Yeah.
Those weren't too abundant back then. I mean, even now.
Yeah, and just the drive that Carl Weathers has. Like I said, he was a complete anomaly. But with Tommy Gunn, I think the character on paper was the most important aspect. And another thing I really like is that they didn't go for a Rocky Balboa clone.
Yeah, I guess if they went down that road while putting Rocky in the ring again, it's a lot of people criticize the street fight also, but I mean, if like you said, if he rode himself into a corner with the brain damage angle, there's no way he would have ended up in the ring anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And again, what motivation would he have to get in the ring, for the 5th time, in the film series?
Yeah.
Once Rocky Balboa came along, enough time has passed where you can write that story.
Mm-hmm.
But I think maybe having it end in the ring and Rocky 5, I don't know. I know it's Ryan's stance that it was a must to have him end in the ring in Rocky 5, but I don't know that it would have helped it.
Yeah, and I mean, 30 years later, nothing we say will change that. And I think that Rocky V has at least established itself as the film that it is. And I've said before that the great thing about the Rocky series is no matter what your mood is, there's a Rocky movie to go with it.
Yeah.
Rocky V, is that movie that you might go to on occasion. I know you don't go to it as often as some of the others, but I still think it's worthwhile and it's got a lot of good to it. And it's more importantly, it's an important part of the Rocky saga. I don't really think you'd have a Creed without Rocky V because for whatever reason, let's say it ends with Rocky IV, the series, and then Coogler comes up with this idea and convinces, Stallone to run with it. How do you introduce Rocky to the Creed universe without having him grounded again?
Yeah. Having him come back to Philly, back to his roots, I think was important. There also the relationship between him and his son, which was his real life son, acting as Robert Jr. But you could say that that's where the strains that we see in Rocky Balboa and in Creed, that's where it originated.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you could say that the roots there were, maybe Robert didn't get over getting cast aside for Tommy Gunn, even though they made up in the end. Maybe that's tough for a kid. That's tough for a kid.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can't remove Rocky V from that universe and not have any of the movies that came after it, including Creed and Creed 2, impacted by it.
Think about this too, just real quickly. How much impact the score had on the first 4 films and how forgettable it is in Rocky V. Can you imagine? Just give us a good score, not necessarily Bill Conti, just a great score for Rocky V. And I think that changes a lot too.
Yeah, all I remember from Rocky V score-wise is just the hip-hop and the Elton John song at the end.
Yeah.
That's a good point. You almost wonder what a different score would have contributed to that movie.
Never know.
Like I said, we've talked a lot about Rocky V here, and I'll defend Rocky V, and I love celebrating Rocky V. So before we go, is there any kind of final thought you have about Rocky V as it turns 30?
No, it's hard to have a conversation about it that really just celebrates it completely. And I know we want to do that because 30 years, it is a feat in itself that we're talking about it and that Stallone was still able to carry the Rocky character through that and beyond. But I enjoy Rocky V for what it is. I haven't seen it in a long time, and I am really eager to getting back to it. And I'm even more eager to covering it minute by minute. Those might be some of our longer episodes because we talk about what we're given and what could have been, stuff like that. It's definitely worth celebrating. And, we got to thank Stallone for giving it to us, man.
Yeah, and you're still a couple of years away. Rocky Minute Season 3 is on the way, and then you'll have to do 4. So, you still have a couple of years before you have to really dive in and immerse yourself in the world that is Rocky 5. So, Doug is, of course, on Rocky Minute, which is part of the Sylvester Stallone Fan Podcast Network, where you are listening to this episode. In addition to the handful of SlyCast episodes you get every year, there's a lot of Rocky Minute content and Going the Distance, the Rocky series content. So if you've been inclined to sort of skip past that stuff as you're looking for SlyCast episodes, please start with Rocky Minute Season 1. Episode 1, and it's a fun journey through the Rocky movies. And I am on both seasons, and I know that we talked for Rocky 3 as well.
Yep, they're there. They're in the can. they're edited and ready to go.
Yeah. So again, like I said, you found this episode, so you know where the network is. Doug, this was a cool discussion. I love talking Rocky 5, and I just love talking with you in general. So until the next episode, Doug, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Craig. It's been a pleasure.
All right, and that brings us to the end of this 30th anniversary celebration of Rocky 5. I hope you've enjoyed this, along with the Rocky 4 anniversary episode we did. But before we leave, I have one listener email to share about Rocky 5, and it's from Peter of Australia. And he says, I first saw Rocky 5 in January of 1991 in Melbourne, Australia. At the time, I don't recall being disappointed with the street fight. I was actually quite emotional and found that the movie's plot had returned to its roots. Always been a supporter of Rocky 5. Of course, not the best in the series, but far more emotionally substantive than Rocky 3 or 4, even though these two were aesthetically very impressive. Ardently enthralled with your podcast service, by the way, verily the last bastions of the Stallone legacy. Thank you so much for that, Peter. That was really, really cool to receive. And again, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
These battered hands are all you own. This broken heart is turned to stone. Hang your glory on the wall. There comes a time when castles fall, and all that's left is